Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge, and for my second video today, we will be looking at my updates for the running back rankings. I will try to swift through this video as quickly as possible. Earlier today, my quarterback updated rankings came out, so check that video out if you have not yet. On Thursday, we'll have the tight ends and the wide receivers, and then on Saturday, I will have the ADP risers and fallers over the past month, guys who have risen the most, fallen the most via their ADPs. For those just getting prepped for their fantasy football drafts, as more and more eyes are going to start looking at fantasy football content, you can go up onto my website, www.theFFforge.com. If you would like to get a refresher on last year's performances, just remember some of the guys who might have performed well or not. The reason what I'm suggesting to go to is down in the description below. There's a link directly to my EV system rankings from last season, or equalized value, and all that is it looks at, it takes into the equation the consistency of the players more than the average fantasy points per week does, which I think is one of the better ways considered to, how many points they had overall as far as ranking the best, second best, third best at a position, running back position, for purposes of this video. I will also provide a little card, I think this corner of the screen, where that would bring you to my top overvalued and top undervalued running backs from the 2022 season. And just to finish up, the difference between EV and average fantasy points per week. Average fantasy points per week can get a little bit lopsided based on one huge week or a couple of huge weeks for a player. Might make them look like they were a little bit better week in and week out, when maybe things look a little bit better just because of 1 or 2 weeks, whereas they were tough to predict essentially when to actually put in your lineup. So that's what I like about the equalized value system. If you have any draft strategy topics that you would like for me to cover, please put those down in the comments below. Let me know. I will read those comments when I get to them, and if I can make a video on them, I will. We have the drafts coming up at the end of this month, so I will have to work away a little bit from those draft strategy videos as we get closer to the draft weekend for most teams, because I do want to do some of those standard videos looking at my targets and my sleepers for each position. So we will also probably be seeing a little bit of an uptick in the number of videos coming out over the next month. With that said, let's get into updating my running back rankings from about a month ago. As far as these rankings go, you can find them up on my website. There's also a link directly to the running back rankings on my website down in the description. Those get updated regularly as needed, as I find making a change to my rankings necessary. So that could be as we get closer to Labor Day weekend, it'll be more consistent. So with that, we have our running back rankings from the last time that you saw them. If you have not looked at my rankings changes over the last month, for this video, I went through and I made a big rankings update at all of these positions. But the first move that we will have is moving Saquon Barkley back behind Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler becoming my RB2. Not super comfortable with Eckler this season, just as far as I don't think that he'll end up as the RB2 at the end of the season, but like, who do I put ahead of him? It's one of those things. And so I had Saquon Barkley ahead of him, but but I will, I have moved Saquon back because we have questions as to whether he'll actually be starting the season week 1. And although I think he probably will be, those are still questions yet to be answered, and there's the possibility that he won't be. So as we get closer to the season, he might fall back a little ways. But once again, I'm pretty optimistic about him, about Josh Jacobs, about I'm missing one guy in that list. There's not a whole lot of leverage that these running backs really have right now, unfortunately for them. So it is what it is. And the next big update that we have changed to these rankings is because of my kind of concern, lack of confidence in some of these guys, I actually have removed my tier break after the Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley tier, which will move up all of these guys. So let's just start moving them up one by one. First up is that I have moved Ramondre Stevenson back like 3 spots. So I'll just move Ramondre up here for now. Moved him back 3 spots. To me, it seems that New England is seriously looking into bringing someone else into this running back room. And so the reason that I had him ranked so highly is because I thought basically he's going to get the lion's share of the workload and really have no competition for the most part back there. The next big move that I had looking at Jonathan Taylor is that he also will be moved back actually at the end of this tier. And I think when I made these rankings, I was really giving into peer pressure of the ADP of rankers and whatnot at that point in time when I made my final rankings for this video the first time around. And since then, he was considerably just been sliding back on my rankings because I really had him too high for my comfort level. And he's slid back to where I think I originally had him when I first did my rankings. Then, since these rankings, Tony Pollard has moved up considerably. He's going to have a wonderful opportunity, so much so that it looks like he is, you know what? First of all, before that, Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb have not really moved. They've just moved forward with other guys moving backwards, Ramondre Stevenson namely behind them. And so I already talked about the Josh Jacobs thing, Nick Chubb. I do think that just like Ramondre Stevenson, my thoughts were on him. There's really no competition there for Nick Chubb to get a lot of the work this season. So excited about that for him. Just doesn't get the receiving work, or I would probably get him up there ahead of Eckler. Then we have Tony Pollard, who has moved up 5 spots since my last rankings update. It's too good of an opportunity to overlook, even though I do have concerns about the wear and tear over a season for Pollard. There's really no competition for him. Then Derrick Henry, I have next up on the list. I think there's really much change, just other guys falling backwards, and Bijan Robinson thus has, I think, slid up a spot or two over time. So that completes my second tier, Austin Eckler, down to Jonathan Taylor at the end. And that's going to start us off with a new tier. And actually, we're going to move Jahmyr Gibbs up ahead of Breece Hall for this tier. And part of the reason that I've done this is that I went back, looked at my projections on Jahmyr Gibbs, and if anything, my projections on him should be conservative, not really meaning that like I don't have him at his ceiling as far as kind of the base level of production that we might be able to get from him. He has jumped up, and I have him up ahead of Breece Hall just because of the injury concerns for Breece Hall. So off-season news. I'm optimistic about Breece Hall, and very, very good news, although I want to be cautious about listening to good news because usually injury news in the off-season is always positive. So I'm going to be cautious about it, but if something's feeling really good, then I'll move him back up. Maybe even into this next tier that I haven't quite been able to push him into because of those injury concerns. I think he'll be worked into the season, but it's looking like he'll be there for week 1, which is, I think, best case scenario for him. And also, we're going to see Joe Mixon make a huge jump up because I had Chase Brown here as my starter. I thought when I did these rankings over a month ago, 2 months ago, even as early as I had my rankings, I was thinking that Chase Brown would be the starter for the Cincinnati Bengals. I thought that Joe Mixon was going to receive the same treatment or even a suspension at one point in time, based on how the team was talking about him pre-draft, and then they went and they grabbed Chase Brown. But ever since a month and a half ago or so, after a lot of silence, things have really changed, and then the contract extension for Joe Mixon. So I think he's clearly the starter there. And he has moved up into my RB 13 spot behind these two. And then we have Najee Harris. I have actually jumped ahead of Aaron Jones, still in this tier, Aaron Jones in this tier, and Kenneth Walker. No change to Travis Etienne. I see the upside, but I'm also very much concerned about where people are drafting him and whatnot. I'm just not as high on him. Chase Brown up there, taking him, I believe, all the way off of this chart. He has fallen off back into, those backup running back kind of guys. Still a target I love, still a running back I love, but, nowhere near as high as I originally had him ranked, thinking that he was going to be an absolute steal, thinking that, I don't know if I finished this thought on Joe Mixon, thinking that Joe Mixon would meet the same fate as Dalvin Cook. But because I think the reason that we haven't seen that happen, in part at least, is if you're Joe Mixon and you look and there are all those names, Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook, who have not found teams yet, do you really want to add your name into that list of veteran guys who are now looking for a job? Yes, of course, like Dalvin Cook's going to find a job, but I mean, it's going to take some injuries maybe for a couple of those guys to find teams. That finishes up the Joe Mixon thing. Then obviously we're going to see Dalvin Cook's gonna fall in the rankings a little ways. We'll just put him there randomly for now. A couple more changes here. Alexander Mattison basically moved right up into, there you are, Alexander Mattison, where I had Dalvin Cook basically. Part of the reason I actually had Dalvin Cook ranked expecting him to get cut. And so I didn't see a team where he could go, and I still barely see a team where he could go where he would be as valuable as he was with the Vikings. I think the Miami Dolphins are the only team where I will be putting Dalvin Cook, way up in the rankings if he goes there, a considerable amount at least. And so that's why I don't really have a difference between Alexander Mattison and Dalvin Cook, even though there is a talent difference between the two. Then J.K. Dobbins, it appears, has moved up a couple of spots, or maybe a couple of guys. I think more so is the truth, is a couple of guys I have kind of slid behind them. J.K. Dobbins next, and then Miles Sanders. So we're seeing DeAndre Swift here falling a few spots, and he's actually going to fall all the way behind James Conner, a guy who, if you recall from my first video, my projections absolutely love him. And I understand why my projections actually absolutely love him. The touchdown thing's going to be a major concern. It holds him back, puts him back to maybe that Dameon Pierce kind of territory last season where, yeah, he is the guy who's going to get all the work every game, but it's going to depend a little bit on getting touchdowns for him to actually be a game changer for your fantasy squad. Still like him, and there is more pass catching upside to him than Dameon Pierce. That said, that brings Dameon Pierce up. Have moved him up a couple of spots in my rankings, it would appear, and no fault of Rachaad White. So I have high hopes for Rachaad White, but that puts Rachaad White next up in my rankings, and that's going to leave us with David Montgomery still probably a couple spots behind where he was, and we'll see our next big mover-upper in James Cook, who moved up a couple of spots, and he's also moved up a tier. By the way, this picture is of a British dude, I believe, named James Cook from some century long ago. To the next tier, our fourth tier, and I think this is going to be our final tier. Some large tiers here for the running backs. Fifth tier, right? Fifth tier. And it's going to start out looking somewhat the same here with Alvin Kamara, Isaiah Pacheco starting off this list. Alvin Kamara was still waiting on, if he's only going to be suspended for like 2 games, we'll definitely move him up. If it's 4 games, I think this is about what I'm expecting. So 4 games, I'd probably have him ranked right about here. I don't like guys missing games for suspension. That really hurts your roster flexibility. The next big mover that we're going to see is Cam Akers. I believe I mentioned in the original video, I was probably too low on him. And I've come to realize, yeah, you were too low on him. So he has moved up in the rankings. Same with Devon A-Chain, moving a little bit up in the rankings, it would appear. Not that I don't think I've actually ended up moving him up specifically. Actually, between Devon A-Chain and A.J. Dillon, I have added a couple of guys that were not originally on the rankings list. We're going to start that off with Khalil Herbert, who I'm like 80% sure that he's going to be the starter for the Chicago Bears. So I have to rank him accordingly, thinking that he will be the starter. But he's still a little bit held back by the fact that I will not be surprised if Deonta Foreman or Roschon Johnson were to end up being the starters for the Chicago Bears. Deonta Foreman just like 1 or 2% higher of a chance in my eyes than Roschon Johnson. Each of them about a 10% chance, I would say. And then Samaje Perine wasn't originally on the list, but he's also going to sneak in here ahead of A.J. Dillon, mostly because unlike A.J. Dillon, he's quite possibly going to be the actual starter for the first several weeks with Javonte Williams. Really looking questionable as to how good he'll be all season long, for one. 2, just thinking of the fact that they brought Sean Payton in, who has utilized 2 running backs in his system often, and the passing running back often outperforming the more traditional running back. Even, it was Alvin Kamara, so there's a reason for that. But still, Samaje Perine should be a part of this offense, regardless of the health of Javonte Williams. But while Javonte Williams is getting his health back, that should be even more of the case, and there's even potential that he'll be the literal starter, and Javonte Williams might not even be starting the season at all, being able to play for a few weeks. That's not something that the quad father A.J. Dillon really has. He's waiting on an injury, but he'll also be an asset throughout the season, especially along the goal line for touchdowns. So that's where I put a guy like Samaje Perine ahead of A.J. Dillon. And then we do have Javonte Williams, because there still is just this enormous upside. If he gets healthy, if he plays well, if he recovers well, for him, for an offense that we think will be better. So I still am not too afraid to take that shot at some point in the draft. And apparently, at least within this tier, is that point. Then Jamal Williams comes up next, and we're going to see a little bit of a jump up for the other running back, the starting running back in, I always want to call them so many names, the Washington Commanders. For the Washington Commanders, Brian Robinson moved him up ahead of Gibson, had Gibson ahead of him originally, but do think that the touchdown upside is, obviously going to be more in favor of the traditional running back, Brian Robinson. And I just have all of these Washington receivers so far up based on my projections in part, and based on my thought that they're going to be a lot more heavy in the passing game. And for some reasons that I'm not sure why they perform exactly as well as they do in my projections. And so I just held that back a little bit from the guy who I think is the most likely to not benefit from this in Gibson. So pull them back just a touch in my rankings. That's going to leave us with two more players. So up here we do have Dalvin Cook next, just because it's an unknown location. And if it's not with Miami Dolphins, I don't see a place where he's like the true starter and gets the bulk of the work. Off the top of my head, if there's other destinations that you think that's the case, let me know. But even in New England, I don't think that would be the case. I think he and Ramondre split similar to Damian Harris and him last season. And that leaves up Rashad Penny, who was not previously in my rankings, has moved up in here. So these are a little bit bigger of a rankings, a top 39. So Rashad Penny moves up into here. The more you go along, the more it makes sense that he might be the traditional starting running back for Philadelphia, with DeAndre Swift kind of maybe splitting the work, DeAndre Swift getting the receiving work on top of that. Something like that would make sense. So, there's just a lot of upside to him as well. And I've warmed up to Rashad Penny over time. I do have a couple of other risers over time to mention in my overall rankings, which you can once again find on the website, link down in the description, www.theffforge.com. Zach Charbonnet, I now have ranked 39th, so he just missed out. He's in the tier below this, just missed out on this video. So actually I have him ranked 40th, not 39th. I don't know if I moved somebody else up after I wrote that or what happened there. Then Raheem Mostert, if he hasn't moved up in my rankings over time, I don't really recall exactly where he was a month ago. He has, at least in my heart and in my mind. I'm a little bit more receptive to drafting him, thinking that there is, a chance that Devon Achane's not the every down kind of guy, or even just that these other guys, one of them, Raheem Mostert, I think, or Jeff Wilson, will get more work than maybe I was thinking a month ago. And Roschon Johnson moved up to, I think, one spot behind Deonta Foreman, running back 47? 46. I don't know what these numbers are. Raheem Mostert, 42. Roschon Johnson, 46. To correct myself. Also on the screen, I should have the rankings from today's video all up so you can check those out. But Roschon Johnson's a really good college running back who could, I think, win the starting job, all things go well. I think that's in the realm of possibilities, so I don't want to forget about that this early in the offseason if you were to be drafting. And he's always a guy you could easily drop if things aren't looking like that at some point. So I will be back on Thursday with more videos. I'll leave these up on the screen for a little bit longer. Thank you very much. Please like, comment, subscribe if you made it this far. Peace out.